Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I've been asked to give a perspective of the global energy situation, really focusing on the future, as to as to be the framework for looking forward to what Sri Lanka can adapt or adjust to the local international situation. As you know, Sri Lanka as a small country is often driven by international situation rather than us driving the international situation. However, in one area, Sri Lanka has been a leader and has been at the forefront of innovation, and that is in the renewable energy sector, particularly the small power program that Sri Lanka instituted in 1997 and had gone on extremely well, and now is being emulated by a number of other countries. And what's most interesting is a number of Sri Lankan small hydro developers are now very active in several East African countries. So Sri Lanka's model is being replicated, and Sri Lanka's technical expertise is now being exported internationally. And that is a great encouragement to me, as I was there at the beginning in 1997 when it all started. Unfortunately, the process in Sri Lanka has stalled for the last 2 years, and I'm hoping today might be a crucial day when the right decision is taken. With that, let me... Okay. Thank you. I'm going to cover just 4 topics in the 20 minutes I have been given. First, looking at the trends in global energy demand as modeled and forecasted by international organizations. Then look at where we see the energy costs going to the extent that we can be as predictive given the uncertainties in the future. Look at climate change and the role energy has been playing. And finally, I will briefly touch upon what it means for Sri Lanka, and my colleagues who will be following will be addressing that topic in more detail. First, now this chart gives you an overview of energy demand, primary energy demand by 2035. As you can see, most of the chart on the right-hand side shows most of the demand increase is going to be driven by demand in Asia, primarily China and India, and also to some extent Southeast Asia. So we are in the middle of a region which is going to be the dominant consumer of all forms of energy going into the future. Now, the growth rate in energy rising from 14,000 to 20,000 millions of tons of oil equivalent between 2013 and 2035 is about 1.5% to 2%, which is similar to the GDP growth globally that's expected. Unfortunately, the decoupling of energy and growth, as Karen had mentioned, is not expected to take place according to IEA. I hope we can prove them wrong. The major driver is going to be China, as we've all expected. But what's interesting is the major growth pole is going to become India after the 2020s, where China's energy efficiency goals, etc., and its growth will also start moderating. So these are the areas that one has to look at, and we are right in the middle of it all. Now, this chart shows the blue lines, the blue bars shows what the growth in total demand, energy demand, was in the last 25 years. And the green chart is the growth expected in the next 25 years or so. What is interesting is IEA takes a very pessimistic look. Basically what they are saying is in the last 25 years, fossil fuels accounted for 82% of the mix. Going into the next 25 years, it's going to be 75%, not much change. But if you look closely at those green bars, you'll notice that the change is very, very significant. Gas, the increase in gas is about the same as it was in the last 25 years. What's interesting, the increase in coal is about 1/3 what it was in the past 25 years. So there is a significant shift away from coal, and renewables is very, very significant. It has increased more than twofold in the next 25 years compared to the previous 25 years. Oil will also expected to diminish in importance in terms of the growth, and nuclear is expected to pick up also. So essentially, are moving from a situation where the dominance of coal and oil are going to decrease, according to the IEA. So I view this a little more positively than IEA's view that little is changing in the next 25 years. The incremental change is is somewhat optimistic. This chart gives you the expected increase in renewable energy capacity additions between 1991 and to 2035. Since 2006, about the last 5 years, there has been a sharp increase in renewable energy intervention, primarily not being driven by climate initiatives or climate agreements, which are still lacking, but mainly by initiatives taken by individual countries for their own goods, whether it's driven by climate interest or industrial interest or because it just makes sense. And in the last 5 years, China has become very dominant in its additions, so that between now and 2035, they expect about 100 gigawatts, 10,000 megawatts of renewables to be added every year globally. What is interesting also is the role of China is expected to decrease in terms of additions, but the role of the rest of the world, including Sri Lanka, is going to become the dominant force, while the Europe and EU are going to remain relatively stable. Now, this is a rather busy chart. Let me just, the top left-hand chart, oil price projections, are projections made by various different organizations ranging from the International Energy Agency, the US Energy Information Administration, the UK Department of Energy and Climate Change, DEC. As you can see, there's huge variations that they are projecting. Now, nobody seems to agree, other than and in some cases, some say the prices in 2013 US dollar basis, the prices are declining. Others say it increases by a factor of 2. So similarly, coal prices show the similar trends, where at the bottom chart on the right, again the variation is a factor of 2. Nobody knows. Anybody could have drawn any line and it would look perfectly good. But the fact is that what we do know is there is going to be tremendous uncertainty. Nobody knows where it's going. Now, in the case of Sri Lanka, when you take into account likely inflation and currency depreciation, the uncertainty and the impact could be quite a bit more significant. So this is something we have to watch out for, to the extent that our continued dependence on coal, oil, will continue, and perhaps LNG, who knows, in the future. What is also known is, according to the IEA and other agencies, fossil fuel subsidies in 2012, just 2 years ago, was $500 billion, and in the case of renewables, it was about $88 billion. So now that might seem lopsided. However, on a unit energy basis, the level of subsidization of renewables still is high compared to fossil fuels, because we are using so much more fossil fuels than renewables. But the fact is, these are factors that are distorting how people consume various forms of energy. So the key point here is huge uncertainties. We don't know where the energy pricing is going to be, so we have to make sure that we can respond accordingly. Now, this is a chart that was prepared by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change on the levelized economic cost of renewable energy, of various forms of renewable energy currently. And I have also added to the chart the green stars, which is the levelized economic cost. Now, these are not financial costs, these are economic costs of renewable energy, based on the assumptions that go into the tariff calculation that PUCSL uses for its renewable energy tariff estimations. Now, what we do see is that on onshore wind projects, Sri Lanka's assumptions lead to a much lower cost. Sri Lanka, quite frankly, has some excellent resources. Now, in Kalpiti area, the average capacity factors are 32%. I understand the Mana locations, the capacity factors may be approaching 50%. So these are exceptionally good wind resources. So that is part of the reason Sri Lanka's onshore costs are lower. Hydro is somewhere in the mid ranges, and going into the future, as Sri Lanka has exploited most of its better hydro resources, the costs are likely to rise. The estimates for solar photovoltaics are my estimates based on current international prices and not IPCC's, because since IPCC produced his report in 2012, there has been a very significant reduction in cost, so I had to recalculate that. But what is interesting is if Sri Lanka ever gets around to do utility scale PV or even commercial scale PV, we are at the low end of the cost range, whereas the residential sector PV, we are somewhere in the middle range. Now, in the case of biomass steam, Sri Lanka's cost estimate is somewhere in the mid-range of international estimates. An interesting point is to take a look at the line which says biomass co-firing, co-feeding. This is when biomass fuels are mixed and generates electricity along with the coal plant. You can go up to maybe 10%. In the case of Norachale, you're talking about, therefore, maybe 90 megawatts. If we can find the fuel, the biggest challenge in Sri Lanka is to find fuel at the right prices. But because the larger power plants, steam power plants are much more efficient than smaller plants, you find that the generation cost can be significantly lower. So this gives you a sense of where we expect. And also, if you take a look, most of the costs are in the 5 to 15 US cents per kilowatt hour range, which is also in the price ranges of coal generation and certainly much lower than oil generation. Unfortunately, the trends in climate change are discouraging. Cumulative energy-related CO2 emissions have been rising steadily, and IEA expects them to continue to rise steadily. And if these trends continue, we are looking at a long-term temperature increase of 5.3 degrees centigrade, which the scientists say is going to cause very significant climatic events, which is going to affect all of us, including Sri Lanka. Now, the chart at the bottom is also very interesting. The US and the European Union reduced their emissions in 2012, whereas China and the other parts of the world increased. So there has been a net increase. The reason for the US reducing its emissions, because thanks to fracking, they have been discovering a lot more supplies of natural gas, and these natural gas power plants are replacing and displacing coal generation. In fact, in some parts of the U.S., existing coal plants has been stopped and replaced by gas-fired power plants. The UK reduction is primarily due to the economic downturn in Europe. But if these trends do continue, I think the world is going to see very, very significant climatic events, which would be unfortunate for all of us. However, IEA estimates that there are four energy options which would have net zero economic cost. And part of it, some of these I think are relevant to us. Most importantly, energy efficiency. Half of the emission savings in order to achieve a 2 degrees centigrade scenario by 2020 is estimated to be due to energy efficiency improvements. These partial removal of fossil fuel subsidies account for about a 10% capturing the methane from upstream oil and gas extraction, as well as from limiting the use of inefficient coal plants, which are primarily subcritical, the smaller subcritical coal plants, including, for example, unfortunately, Norachale, will also contribute to reducing climate. So there are ways in which emissions can be reduced if we do have the political view and the right financial signals are given. And some of these, as you can see, do affect us, and I think some of the speakers following will be addressing some of these topics. Unfortunately, over the last couple of years, thanks to the economic crisis that the world has faced, global climate change has taken a lower political priority than economic change. On the other hand, there have been mixed news on the energy trends. The US has been switching from gas to coal, as I mentioned. Unfortunately, renewable energy investments also declined in 2012, but we hope it can pick up as economic development takes place. There has been greater investments in energy efficiencies. However, nuclear and carbon capture and storage is still some ways off being truly economic options. Finally, let me just address a few points which my colleagues on the panel and later on are going to discuss in more detail. What does it all mean for Sri Lanka? Number one, in my view, I think we do need to diversify energy sources to those that are not necessarily correlated with fossil fuel prices and to increase our energy use. I mentioned to you that we have little control over fossil fuel prices because we are a small player in the international trading, oil and gas trading business and coal trading business. So as a result, we do need to diversify into other technologies. Renewables is one of it. That will have no correlation with fossil fuel prices. And energy efficiency improvements can often be a no-cost and even economically or profitable investment. I think we do need to give greater emphasis in that. We have started some work, I think, in Sri Lanka, but I think a stronger political and a policy push would make it even stronger. The transport sector, which I think accounts for 60, maybe even going forward, maybe 80% once all the oil generation switches to coal, is going to be key. Oil last year was about $5 billion, I think, in imports. And if you are ever going to moderate that, if you do not address the transport sector, we will not get out of further dependence on increased dependence on oil. And we are looking at not just improving existing transport modes, but also looking at alternatives to transport as a way of reducing petroleum. One area that I think Sri Lanka has not given adequate political or even attention even at the institutional level, at the government level, is to take measures to mitigate against likely climate events. It doesn't matter whether the current drought is due to El Nino or whether it's due to other climate change. The fact is Sri Lanka's climate has become less stable and unpredictable, and we are all suffering from it. We see the drought this year. It seems to be a repeat of 2011, 2012, but little has happened in those years to help us mitigate against those climate events. We've seen rainfall variability. There has been sudden floods in certain parts of the country. There have been droughts now. So there is hydropower output uncertainty, as we are witnessing right now. There's also going to be, even if we switch to renewables energy, biomass yields are going to be variable depending on the rainfall. Intensity of rainfalls will affect structures through floods and also damage to various agricultural plantations. Whether it is floods or, on the other hand, droughts are both affected. Sea level rises and storms, our facilities are going to have to be adjusted and strengthened to withstand these effects going into and particularly fuel delivery. We've seen that, for example, in Norachali, you have to stockpile months of coal because during the monsoon season, delivery of coal is difficult and weather becomes more uncertain. More stocks will have to be kept, which means tying up capital in inventory. High temperatures will affect the efficiency of cooling plants. It will also increase the demand for cooling, where there's air conditioning, which is now a rising demand in the western province, and we've seen the peak demand in Colombo becoming an afternoon peak thanks to cooling. So these are effects. And finally, cyclones and other extreme weather could damage energy facilities, including wind, solar plants. So I think there needs to be a greater attention to mitigation measures in every sector, whether it's energy or agriculture or health services or whatever. If we don't take care of mitigation measures, I think we are going to be in a very, very difficult situation. So with that, I would like to thank you very much for your attention, and I hope some of these points are picked up by my colleagues in their talks today. Thank you.